The Amish vanished in 1992. 10 years later, the community spots a crucial detail. In 1985, Sheriff Ray Holbrook and Deputy Leah Ortega left their Presidio, Texas station for a night shift and vanished into thin air. 16 years later, hikers peered into an abandoned outhouse in the Chinati Mountains and discovered a body that cracked the case wide open. What followed was a truth far darker than anyone expected. It was October 15, 1985. On a late autumn evening, 2 law enforcement officers went missing in Presidio County, Texas. Sheriff Ray Holbrook, age 42, and Deputy Leah Ortega, age 25, had just begun their night patrol. It was supposed to be routine. The desert town population, about 3,000, lay quiet under the Chihuahuan sky. By sunrise, neither had returned to the station. Their patrol car was found abandoned on Highway 67. The keys were in the ignition. No skid marks, no signs of struggle. Just a silent vehicle on an empty road. With no ransom demands, no clues, nothing. The community plunged into confusion. Search teams combed the brush. FBI agents assisted, and local gossip floated wild theories: cartel kidnapping, a fugitive manhunt gone wrong, a lover's quarrel, but no credible breaks. Families ached. The press speculated. Friends whispered that the pair had vanished into thin air. 16 years passed. The vanished sheriff and deputy became a decades-old mystery, whispered in local bars and still dark living rooms. Then came November 2, 2001. A pair of hikers retired. Ruth and Carl Donnelly vented from a hike in the Chinati Mountains. Needing relief, they ducked into a rusty wooden outhouse. Carl leaned in and flashed his flashlight at the deep pit. A boot appeared, leather glinting. They backed away, called rangers. The structure was sealed away from public use in 1992, yet someone had left a body in it. Detective Simon Reyes, then 35, and now the lead homicide investigator in Presidio PD, learned about the find and immediately retrieved the 1985 case file. Everything pointed to Holbrook's badge and uniform being buried in that pit. Simon grabbed his partner, Detective Cara DuPont, and 2 deputies, who'd originally testified against Ray and Ortega deputies, Debbie Carr and Trish Merrow, and sped to the scene. Ruth's eyes trembled in a clearing of mesquite and scrub. "We didn't touch anything," she said. Simon nodded. "We'll handle it. Please step back." The forensics team pulled apart the seat. Tools scraped boards. Finally, they found an officer's belt revolver and badge number 4723 matching Sheriff Holbrook's ID. Half mummified in the cold, dry pit, Holbrook's remains stared back at history. It was true the mystery had shifted. They'd been chasing Deputy Ortega's disappearance, and whether she'd been kidnapped too, but now only one body lay in that pit. Ortega was still missing, presumed dead, or worse, still alive in silence. Deputies Carr and Merrow stood behind shielding goggles, faces pale. Together in 1985, they testified that Holbrook had been making unwanted comments, maybe even abusing his power. Their testimony fed the idea that he kidnapped her after impropriety, but no evidence ever emerged. Simon studied their faces. A hint of guilt flickered behind their eyes as Marisol Ortega Laya's mother arrived unsteady after 16 years, clinging to hope. "It's him," she whispered. "Not my baby." Marisol collapsed into Simon's arms. The case grew more complicated by the hour. Simon ordered every backcountry outhouse searched. If the culprit used one, there might be more evidence or other bodies. Search teams fanned out across the Chinati slopes. Meanwhile, Simon drove Leah's mother home, gently telling her, "We'll find the truth. We won't stop." Back at headquarters, the case file lay reopened. Dust settled off faded witness interviews, interrogation transcripts, bar receipts from the Dusty Spur Saloon. Holbrook and Ortega had spent their last hours talking to truckers at that bar. They vanished after midnight. The bar was the last place they were both seen. What happened next? Who killed Holbrook and why? Was Ortega complicit or a victim too? How could a remote cave-like outhouse hold answers while investigators searched miles of desert? Detective Simon Reyes couldn't sleep. That night, after dropping Marisol Ortega home, he sat under the humming lights of the Presidio Police Department, the case file open across his desk. The truth, the real truth about Sheriff Holbrook and Deputy Ortega had been buried for 16 years, but now the sheriff's remains had surfaced, and the narrative cracked like dry desert clay. Was Ortega dead too? Or was she involved? Simon traced the timeline. October 15th, 1985. Holbrook and Ortega leave for routine patrol. Last seen at 9:30 p.m. at the Dusty Spur Saloon. They never returned. Their car was found abandoned. Keys still in the ignition. No blood. No shell casings. No witnesses. He rubbed his temples. Then something tugged at him. The saloon. What was it about that bar? His instincts told him to go back. He grabbed his jacket and drove through the sleeping streets. It looked the same: flickering neon, dusty gravel, the smell of beer and old grease. Inside, truckers sipped drinks, muttering across tables. The jukebox mumbled out an old Johnny Cash tune. Simon took a seat at the bar. The bartender was young Jumpy. Definitely not Miguel Vasquez, the one who served Holbrook and Ortega in '85. Simon ordered a bourbon. "You know what happened here back in 1985, he asked. The bartender paused nervously. "I've heard stories. People say the sheriff and his deputy got too close to something they shouldn't. Ever meet Vasquez? Not personally. Heard he just left. Like one day vanished. No warning." Simon made a note. "Where did he live?" "Cedar Avenue. House number 59, I think." Simon's heart kicked. That was the same street he'd been tailed to earlier. The strange house. The dark blue Chevy Malibu. The guy who claimed his wife broke a vase, and the silent figure on the couch. He left the bar and drove straight back to Cedar Avenue. The house labeled 47 was dark again, but something didn't add up. The house numbering skipped from 51 to 61. 59 were missing. Could this be Vasquez's old house, now relabeled? Simon and Detective Kara DuPont returned with flashlights. They examined the house. The 47 had clearly been altered. Peeling paint revealed faint traces of different numbers beneath. Kara found a small silver butterfly pin in the dirt. She picked it up, eyebrows furrowed. Debbie Carr has a whole collection of these, different one every day. Her grandmother gave them to her. "What would Debbie be doing here?" Simon whispered. Calls to both Debbie and Trish went unanswered. Simon radioed the station. "Pull property records for 59 Cedar. Current occupant shows as Juan Delgado moved in 3 months ago, but I want to know everything about Miguel Vasquez." Dispatch confirmed Vasquez lived there in 1985. Records after 1991 were missing. Filing errors. The front door was ajar. Simon and Kara approached cautiously. Inside, blood smeared the floor tiles. The trail led down the hallway, smeared across the carpet. Drag marks. Nobody. Backup arrived. The house was cleared. Trish was gone. Taken. Simon muttered, "This is no coincidence. Someone's tying up loose ends," Kara said grimly. Simon called in an immediate lockdown on all highways and farm roads out of Presidio. No trucks leave this town. Set up checkpoints. Notify Border Patrol. We have 2 missing deputies. Simon and Kara confronted the bartender, Carlos Mendoza. "We know you've been watching for law enforcement," Simon said coldly. "You've been tipping off smugglers." Carlos broke quickly. "They pay me extra to signal when cops come in. Truckers from Ojinaga. They call themselves Los Transportistas. They move drugs, people, girls. I don't ask questions. You've seen American Girls." Carlos nodded, scared, drugged. "But yeah, some." Simon leaned in. "Where do they take them?" "There's a place in Ojinaga. Zona Rosa. A brothel." Simon stepped back. "You're coming with us. You're going to ID every face you know. We're ending this." Carlos nodded, defeated. I'll help. The Presidio Ojinaga International Bridge shimmered under midnight lights. Within 20 minutes, a joint task force was assembled, FBI, DA, and Mexican Federal Police. They had the target a pink building in the Zona Rosa, called La Rosa de Fuego, the Rose of Fire, a known cartel front. The same place the traffickers brought young girls. Carlos had confirmed it. Simon was quiet in the convoy. He knew Debbie and Trish were likely inside, dead or alive. Time was running out. The operation launched at 2:15 a.m. Officers stormed the compound, shots fired, doors kicked, girls screamed. Chaos erupted. Simon and DuPont cleared the upstairs rooms, and there they were. Debbie Carr and Trish Merrow, tied and gagged, still in their uniforms, terrified but alive. Thank God, Trish whispered. We thought nobody was coming. They were safe, but Simon wasn't done. In a dark upstairs chamber, Simon found her. A woman in her 40s, robe torn, eyes hollow, hair stringy. But something in her face, despite the years, told him everything. Deputy Ortega, he whispered. She looked up, startled. You're too late, she said. It's never too late. Simon stepped inside. We found Ray. We know you didn't run. Tears welled up. You survived, he said gently. You're not a criminal. You're a victim. Her hands trembled. I thought everyone forgot me. Your mother never stopped hoping, he said. She's on her way. Laya Ortega sobbed. Laya Ortega hadn't seen a sunrise in years. Not a real one. As the first light crept across the skyline of Ojinaga, she sat wrapped in a Red Cross blanket outside the brothel that had been her prison. The DEA and Mexican Federal Police were processing the scene cartel men in zip ties boxes of heroin in the back room. Dozens of traumatized girls quietly awaiting help. But all she could think about was her mother. Simon Reyes approached with 2 coffee cups. Laya, he said softly, she's here. She froze. And then she stood every step toward the waiting van, a mixture of dread and hope. Inside, Marisol Ortega sat trembling, clutching her purse like a lifeline. The moment their eyes met, everything fell away. 16 years of guilt, pain, and wondering. Mama, Laya whispered. Marisol rushed forward and embraced her. Mi hija, my daughter. You're alive. I'm sorry. I was broken. I didn't know how to come back. You're home now, her mother whispered. That's all that matters. Inside a sterile interview room, Leia sat across from Detective Reyes. She'd showered, changed into clean clothes, but her hands still trembled. Her voice cracked often. I want to help, she said. I want to tell you everything. Simon set a recorder on the table. You're not under arrest, Leia. You're a victim. But the more we understand, the more we can stop this, she nodded. Start at the beginning, she asked. Please. Ray and I were following leads on missing girls, she began. Teenagers, local, vanished without a trace. We had reason to believe they were trafficked across the border. Simon nodded, flipping through his notes. You were at the Dusty Spur that night. Yeah. Ray ordered us drinks. We barely took a sip when things got blurry. We were drugged. Rohypnol, she nodded. Probably. Next thing I remember, we were outside stumbling, trying to get to our car. That's when they jumped us. One of them was Raul Espinoza. They called him El Lobo. He ran the operation. Others were just muscle. Ray fought back. Even drugged, he tried to reach for his weapon, but they beat him. Tire irons. One of them shot him in the chest, twice. Simon closed his eyes, breathing slowly. And they threw me in a van. I was barely conscious. Simon leaned forward. What happened next is the part that doesn't make sense. Trish and Debbie responded to the scene. Why didn't they stop it? They made a deal, Leia whispered. I saw it. El Lobo offered them money, promised to erase their debts, told them to frame Ray, say he ran off with me. You're saying they helped clean up the murder. They did more than that. They helped hide his body. They changed the story. Simon's voice dropped. Why would they agree Debbie was drowning in gambling debt? Trish's son had leukemia. She was behind on treatments. El Lobo offered them money and protection. Simon wrote this down carefully. That story about Ray harassing them, it wasn't true, no. Ray was old school, sure, but never inappropriate. He was a good man, and they dumped him in an abandoned outhouse. They thought it would be serviced and the body removed, gone without a trace. Simon exhaled hard, until hikers found him last week. They brought me across the border that night, Leah said. Burned my ID, gave me a new name, Lucia. What happened to you in the years after she looked away? You know what they do to girls in places like that. Drugs, clients, no one to help. I was just another ghost. You never tried to escape to where, with what name, what papers. Any girl who tried got killed, beaten in front of us. Simon paused. You were buried by lies and forgotten, exactly. The only thing that kept me alive was the hope that maybe someone still remembered me. He met her eyes. We never stopped. That evening, Leah was brought back across the border under protection. A local safe house became her temporary home. Simon worked non-stop. Interviews, search warrants. Carlos Mendoza was cooperating. He identified several of the cartel's key players from photos. Debbie Carr and Trish Merrow were under arrest. Both were being held in protective custody, and both had confessed. Their statements mirrored Leah's testimony. Desperate choices don't justify betrayal, Simon told DuPont. They'll have to answer for what they did. Miguel Vasquez DuPont said, holding a thin file. The bartender from 85. He disappeared just a few years later. No known address. Fake identities are possible. Simon frowned. I think he knew too much. Maybe he helped El Lobo. They traced him through property records. A small farm in Chihuahua. The DEA was preparing to raid it. Meanwhile, Simon visited Leah and her mother. The reunion had shaken him. Years of hard cases rarely moved him anymore. But this one stuck. You held on, he told her quietly. That's rare. I didn't feel strong, she admitted. That's because you were surviving, he replied. Evidence piled up fast. Cell records linked Carlos to cartel couriers. Hidden cameras at the Dusty Spur captured license plates. Border agents confirmed patterns of human trafficking. But the cartel wasn't done. One night, a black SUV followed Simon's vehicle. Another officer found a GPS tracker under his car. Someone was watching. They know the walls are closing in, DuPont warned. They'll lash out. Simon increased security around Leah and her mother, and began preparing a RICO case that could bring down the entire trafficking ring. But he knew this was just the beginning, because the truth about the 1985 disappearance wasn't just about murder or cover-ups. It was about power, corruption, and a town that had looked the other way for too long. The streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over town. Patrol cars lined the station parking lot, some with front bumpers dented from coming and going too fast. Inside, detectives and agents worked feverishly. Walls were littered with photos, maps, timeline charts. Captain Reyes stood at the center whiteboard, marker in hand. Shelter angle is solid, Leah, he said, turning to her. You did more than survive, you held the truth. Leah nodded wearily. I want justice for Ray. For all of us. Captain Reyes began grouping files. That means linking key players, El Lobo's crew, the insiders, financiers. Plus Miguel Vasquez. He must have helped. He vanished in 95. No known address. Could be a cartel scapegoat. Detective DuPont spoke up. We traced a safe house in Chihuahua. DEA can carry out a raid in 24 hours. Reyes glanced at her. Then let's get a warrant. 24 hours later, Chihuahua outskirts. DEA agents. Mexican federal police and Reyes stood behind SUVs parked in dust. A rundown farmhouse sat under a silver sky. Reyes whispered into his radio signal green. They stormed the place. Inside, agents found stacks of passports, American-Mexican, some with blank photos, some with real ones. ID plates, forged documents. A photo album, images of Ray and Leah leaving the Dusty Spur in 85, time-stamped with untraceable times, edited margins. Miguel's bar apron hung on a nail. Reyes pocketed the apron. Discrete cameras in ceiling corners, live feeds. All part of the surveillance network. They discovered ledgers, payments to Debbie and Trish. A list titled Protections, linking drug shipments and people trafficking runs. Miguel's name was scribbled hundreds of times. Reyes called Compressor Reyes in a low voice. "We got everything. Get Leia here for ID. Build the chain for Rico." He held back tears as the evidence clicked together. Back in Presidio, the court-appointed public defenders representing Carr and Merrow fought. The media descended on the small county court. Protesters for justice held signs. Stop police trafficking. Petition letters piled. Social media erupted. Reyes held a press briefing. These officers betrayed trust. Their cooperation with cartel traffickers cost lives, starting with Deputy Ortega Sheriff Holbrook and hundreds of victims over decades. Leia appeared calmly beside him. She spoke. "They changed one murder into 16 years of suffering. I'm here today not just for my case, but for every lost or hidden victim. We have to dismantle this network. Not just punish, but prevent." Her voice trembled once during "not just punish, but prevent," but she held it together. Cameras flashed. Twitter trended. In the courthouse, Carr and Morrow entered the dock in suits with prison blue shirts. Their attorneys argued coercion. They were threatened by the cartel, they say. But prosecutors presented the ledger's payments, phone logs, forged ID documents, the outhouse video, and the Dusty Spur entry footage. One by one, survivors and smugglers testified, some from prison. Some sheltered witnesses, including Carlos Mendoza. He sat under glare-proof glass, giving key details. The chief prosecutor stated, "This is not an isolated case. This is a nexus of drug trafficking, human trafficking, and corruption protected by the highest in local law enforcement." The judge paused before the verdict. Outside, protesters chanted. Leia and Marisol stayed in a small, secure suite. Police presence was constant. Leia's eyes no longer carried the haunted glaze, they reflected determination. Marisol looked into her daughter. "You're doing this for Ray, but also for us." "I won't stop," Leia said. 16 years was too long. Unrest stirred in Ojinaga and Chihuahua. DEA intercepted messages, threats aimed at Sawyer Reyes and Ortega. A key courier was arrested trying to cross papers linked to Miguel's farmhouse. In Presidio, law enforcement increased surveillance. Patrol cars marked Rico targets. Reyes had bodyguards now, day and night. He realized threats were real, but this was what he'd signed up for. Carr and Morrow pleaded for leniency. Victims' families demanded harsher sentences. The TV anchor interviewed Leia. "Do you forgive?" She paused. "I forgive no one's betrayal of trust. I forgive Ray's memory as a good man. I do not forgive those who enabled his death." Public opinion swayed heavily in favor of accountability. Legislators proposed new bills, mandatory transparency for arrests. Local office audits, ratification of cooperation protocols with Mexican law enforcement. In late May, the motion to sever ties with Hinterland County's sheriff's corruption network went through. Presidio County declared a new oversight committee. Investigations launched into other departments. In Chihuahua, authorities seized 6 brothels, including the one where Leia was held. 6 surviving women were rescued, flown back to U.S. care. Many testified in cartel trials. At the safe house's courtyard, Leia met each of the rescued women. They shared hugs, tears. She realized her nightmare had opened a door into something bigger, collective liberation. "You gave me back my life," one survivor said. Leia whispered, "We gave it back to each other." The hot summer courtroom crackled with tension. Inside, Judge Ramirez presided over a packed chamber. Carr and Morrow sat flanked by their defense attorneys, faces tight with fear. Prosecutor Martinez laid out damning evidence ledger entries, surveillance photos from Chihuahua, forged IDs, all building a case of betrayal, corruption, and conspiracy. Defense lawyers countered, claiming coercion by cartel muscle threats to their families' duress under fear. They didn't collude willingly, fear made them acquiesce, Moro's attorney argued. But Martinez made them respond sharply. Prosecutor Deputy Carr confessed to willingly helping hide Holbrook. Trish enabled the dumping and faced no violence from cartel operatives. Trish and Debbie hung their heads. Witnesses wiped tears. Leia, in a wheelchair, watched silently, eyes glazed with resolve. After a day of closing arguments, jury instructions, and agonizing wait, Judge Ramirez returned, guilty on counts of conspiracy accessory to murder, obstruction of justice, and human trafficking for both Carr and Moro. Gasps echoed. Trish wept. Debbie trembled. Leia exhaled relief mixed with sorrow. Judge Ramirez condemned them 25 years without parole restitution to victim families and lifetime bans from law enforcement. Outside, the media flocked to Leia. She spoke quietly. Their betrayal cost lives. Their conviction restores faith. But this is just a step. The cartel network remains. Flashbulbs popped, echoes of public scrutiny clamoring for more reform. Meanwhile, cross-border raids continued. DEA, FBI, and Mexican federal police swooped on cartel cells across Chihuahua and Tualatin, Texas. 6 regional bosses were captured. Fabrica cartel's northbound trafficking pipeline disrupted. All during simultaneous operations named Project Outhouse. Reyes was on his radio nonstop 6 down, including El Lobo's lieutenant. But intel shows the cartel head is regrouping. I need continued support. The justice chain clicked forward. Yet whispers of cartel retaliation reached border town ears. Reyes started wearing a bulletproof vest, sleeping in secure rooms. At the county courthouse, Leia joined lawmakers and activists praising new legislation mandating transparency in internal investigations. Sheriff departments statewide now require body cameras on every shift, a civilian oversight board created with subpoena powers. Leia testified before a legislative panel, trust shattered. Rebuilding needs sunlight. Transparency isn't optional, it's essential. Her words resonated. Bills passed unanimously. Presidio declared a model for reform. Deep inside the safe house, Leia met Marisol. They stood in the living room. Tears brimmed. Embrace held wordless weight. Marisol said, "You are free. You survived." Leia, voice trembling, replied, "I'm home. Mama and I'm going to fight so no one loses theirs." Much remained to heal. Trauma therapy, support groups, family reunions, community listening sessions held weekly at the church. Leia became an outspoken advocate. She spoke at national conferences on misogyny and law enforcement, giving TEDx-style talks on betrayal from within. She helped train future deputies, publicly sharing her story to shift culture. Captain Reyes stayed at her side, guiding cases while building an independent task force. They created a private foundation, the Route 7 Initiative, honoring Holbrook's memory and supporting survivors. Marisol volunteered, teaching trauma-informed counseling. First responders credited her work. Carrie and Mero, languished in prison, paid the price. Their silence, now broken, yielded key intelligence on hidden trafficking hubs. 6 months later, the Cartac trial began in Chihuahua, cartel bosses in shackles. Faces broadcast worldwide via video link. Hundreds of trafficking routes exposed. Mexican federal courts sentenced several to life without parole. International cooperation praised. Leia watched from home, tears of vindication and grief. Reyes tapped her shoulder. "You started this, Leia. You changed things." She nodded. Back in Presidio, the Dusty Spur reopened under new management. Locals held a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Reverend Parker invoked second chances. Leia was chief guest. She sipped lemonade as truckers filed in, smiling. A hush during her speech. "We gather today in a place that once hid secrets. Now it stands in the light. We remember the lost. We honor the founder. We vow never to forget and never to repeat." Applause. Across multiple states, sheriffs began proactive reviews. Victim-led advocacy groups formed. Documentary crews visited Presidio. National newspapers picked up the story. Police trafficking scandal sparks nationwide reform. Social media tags like hashtag Justice for Leia trended. Laya's story inspired other whistleblowers to come forward. The courtroom victories and legislative reforms were only part of the story. Beneath the surface, darker forces stirred. The Fabrica cartel, reeling from Project Outhouse, plotted a violent response. And Leia, despite her rising profile, remained their target. Late one evening, a black SUV screeched up outside Captain Reyes' home. He saw masked figures jump out clearly, aiming for Leia. But Reyes had anticipated this. Body camera footage streamed live. Gunshots rang out, but instead of panic, the attackers were met with precision law enforcement return fire. 2 suspects were wounded, one escaped into the darkness. The message was clear: retaliation wouldn't succeed. That same night in Ojinaga, Mexican federal police arrested another Fabrica lieutenant, codenamed La Sombra. Intelligence gleaned from a weapons cache linked him to the assassination attempt. Yet the final boss remained at large. In the aftermath, Leia accepted Reyes' invitation to stay in a government-provided safe house. But hiding wasn't her style. She addressed reporters outside the compound. "Fear is what they want. I won't give it to them." She wore a simple black polo no badge, visible just conviction. She continued, "My life had value then. It has value now, and no gunman can change that." Her words were carried on Ultranet news channels. Support poured in not just locally, but from law enforcement survivors and activists nationwide. With the legal parts in motion, Leia co-founded the Route 7 Survivor Alliance, a coalition of women officers, trafficking survivors, legal aid, advocates, mental health professionals, and community leaders. They launched initiatives, body and soul training, trauma-informed care for frontline officers, Speak Up, Hotline Anonymous, reporting of internal corruption, advocacy for safe houses, nationwide funding for protected shelters. Within 8 weeks, 3 state legislatures introduced bills modeled on Virginia's reforms. Survivor-led testimony now required before every vote. Leia appeared before legislative committees in Georgia, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. Her testimony was short, stark, unforgettable. "You may think my story is rare. It's not. It's urgent. You have power to stop it, but only if you act." Amid the public surge, Leia sought closure with Marisol. They returned to Presidio on the anniversary of the disappearance, October 15th. Under a harvest moon, they placed white roses beneath a memorial plaque for Holbrook and those lost. Leia spoke softly, "You never left my heart. I will carry you forward." The crowd that gathered was small family, colleagues, community, but the silence that followed had weight. Some carried tissues, no applause, no speeches, just presence, just grief, and just a quiet promise never forgotten. Detective Reyes stayed relentlessly focused on tracking El Lobo. New evidence suggested he had established new routes through Canada. FBI and Interpol data tracking showed suspicious cargo entries in Ontario, mass shipments, avoiding body scans. Leia, briefed at the safe house, refused to stay silent. From behind tinted safety glass, she watched charts map his next move. She tapped a finger on a hotspot marked Winnipeg. She lowered her voice. "Set up wiretaps. Surveillance. We close this hole and his network stops." Within weeks, Canadian RCMP and DEA partners made simultaneous raids. El Lobo was arrested in a Winnipeg warehouse surrounded by crates of unmarked vans, encrypted phones, and ledgers. He was extradited to the U.S., facing charges in both countries. Winter 2005. TEDx stage in Washington. Spotlight bright. Leia stood alone in front of a black curtain, a single microphone. "I stood in a dark outhouse and saw death. I broke through a cartel's shield, found survivors, and lost trust when I most needed it. But telling the truth, painful, damning, undeniable, became my weapon." The audience was silent. Then a thunderous standing ovation. Tweets exploded. Hashtag #LeiaLive trended worldwide. Pundits praised her courage. Critics questioned law enforcement partnerships. But the influencers said, her story changes the narrative. By early 2006, Leia's story drove reform in Colorado, Missouri, Tennessee. Funds allocated for border intersection units, rural trafficking surveillance. Survivor testimonies featured in headline segments on 60 Minutes and Dateline, doubling donations to anti-trafficking NGOs. At the same time, Leia quietly returned to active duty, cleared, protected, honored. She was promoted to Special Advisor on Internal Affairs for the Texas DPS with her own oversight team. Cartel violence receded, but not ended. Some local studies reported fewer trafficking losses. Others warned of growing digital smuggling. Women flagged via sleeper cells and encrypted networks. Leia and Reyes remained vigilant. In February 2006, they visited a small border town community center, met families who shared their own Route 7 stories, missing daughters, lost sons. Leia knelt, held a mother's hand, promised, "We're not done. Not until you are safe, not until trust returns."